Okay, let's dive in. My name is Scott Brooks. I'm from Org Vitality, and I am helping to moderate the session Bottom-Up, Top-Down, or Blended, Approaches and Lessons from Allstate and PepsiCo. I am pleased to be joined by two colleagues that I have deep respect for, and I will introduce them in a minute. But let's get started and dive in. So first of all, the presenters. We have Jain Acosta. Jen has been at Allstate, where she spent 7 years in talent analytics, providing consulting, expertise, analytics solutions into Allstate business partners and so forth, and worked on all things related to the survey. And she also addressed life cycle surveys and so forth and so on. I've known Jen for several years now, most in her capacity on the board of directors of the Mayflower Group and is currently the chair. She has a PhD in IO psychology from Penn State, go Nittany Lions, and has also been published and presented quite a bit in various top-tier journals and at conferences like the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. So that's Jen. Let me quickly introduce Sachin. Sachin comes from a little bit of a different experience. He's been in all kinds of diverse HR roles across different global geographies. So in many ways has been a customer of survey work from Center of Excellence, but now he does lead the Culture and Engagement Center of Excellence at PepsiCo, and he's definitely passionate at elevating the digital experience and the customer experience of managers and employees involved with surveys. Sachin has a graduate degree in mechanical engineering and an MBA in HR. So I am delighted to have both of these people talking to us today, and I'm excited. I've had the sneak peek clearly of what they have to say, and I think there's some very interesting themes. And so as they talk, listen for objectives, accountabilities, machinery, and some of those things that they'll be talking about. So without further ado, I'm going to pitch it over to Sachin, who will start the program on his side.
Hey, thanks, Scott.
Yep.
As you stop sharing and let me share my screen. Again, thanks, Scott, for providing us this opportunity. I cannot be more delighted than what I am today. And I also want to thank all the people or colleagues who have joined to listen in, because this is probably not the best use of time on Friday evening. But heck, with COVID and lockdown, what else would you do? So you get to listen to me and Jen and then Scott. So with that, let's talk about PepsiCo's story, where we empowered managers to drive employee engagement. And let me tell you what we did and what we learned through that experiment over 2019 and some part of 2020. Just before that, mandatory, all of you would know PepsiCo. We create smiles, 1 billion every day. We have more than $22 billion brands. And even in these times of lockdown, I'm proud to say that our frontline teams are working very hard to provide or supply all the products to each one of you. And I'm sure all of you are getting your supplies. And if not, please write to us, and PepsiCo is making sure that products are available across the country. These are some of our brands. I'm sure if we had a sort of an interactive session or a face-to-face session, I love to ask people which are the brands that you were not aware on this slide, which were PepsiCo. And there are few which I was not aware before I saw this slide, but I'm sure each one of you has one of your favorite or one brand which you didn't know is PepsiCo, but these are all PepsiCo's brands. Coming to the survey world, which Scott said we are all passionate about. We at PepsiCo have a long history of employee engagement, and our surveys over a period of time have evolved to cater to current needs. We have fine-tuned the surveys, taking the items down sometimes, taking the items up sometimes, adding research content. But as everything or every process goes through a refresh, in any large organization of a size of PepsiCo, we had this moment of refresh button being hit late in 2018, where we said, okay, what are we doing with this program, and can we really take feedback from all our stakeholders? And as we went to take feedback from stakeholders, there were 4 key themes which appeared in front of us. One, this has become a Frankenstein survey. We really don't know what's the purpose. Are we satisfying the need of senior leaders by this survey, or are we satisfying the need of local managers? We were not clear. We also realized that all these different stakeholders have different needs. Leadership wants to know about something very different than what our sector teams, which are the geographies for us, want to know, or local HRBPs or managers want to know. So there are different needs that each of the stakeholders have. And are we catering to each of them, or are we confused at this point in time? We also heard a need for empowering managers, where through the process they felt that they had all the burden on them, but they were not empowered enough. And we also understood that now, more so than in past, we could also listen intelligently to our employees at different moments in their life cycle, and moments that really matter to them. So with that feedback, you can imagine our mandate was clear to kind of relook at and refresh the program. And therefore, what did we do? We developed a program which we call Intelligent Listening internally. But what did we do? We changed this Frankenstein survey, which was trying to capture everything and trying to cater to every need. We said we'll have a segmented approach. We'll have multiple surveys with assignments to different stakeholders, and I'll show you that. From a long list of items, we said we would have only items which can predict employee performance and turnover are the items that will find a place in our surveys. From a top-down action planning approach, we said we want to empower managers with coaching support by HR teams. Since these surveys or our Frankenstein survey was not catering to the need of everyone, there were multiple local surveys. So one, we cleared that with segmented approach, but we also provided quality support and a platform to our local teams in different geographies to ensure that the quality of our entire serving program in PepsiCo goes up. And in terms of frequency, we were earlier doing, once in 2 years, a full-fledged, and then alternate years, some kind of a pulse. To that, we said, okay, we have to get into shorter and frequent surveys, because in the old world, once in 2 years was okay. But with now things changing so fast, by the time you get the survey result, if you work with old timelines of 3 months of data collection and 3 months of survey reporting, then by the time you get the responses, the world has already changed. Like it changed this year, after early March, we all never knew that, today we were supposed to be in PSYOP, most of us, and today we are doing a virtual session. So with the change, how do we keep pace with that? So with that, we created a portfolio of surveys, which first we said, senior leaders, what do they need? What's the assignment to them? And what are the kind of information they need? So we developed something that we call ECI, which is Employee Confidence Index, where we survey quarterly at a certain level in the organization to provide senior leaders what they need. And it is related to the assignment that they have or the actions that they need to take in their roles. We refreshed our Org Health, which is our core program, which reaches out to all our employees. And when I say all employees, all professional and frontline, I mean 260,000 employees across the globe in 31 languages. We reach out to them on an annual basis, where we said the actions of the feedback that we receive has to be given back to managers, and they need to take local actions based on the feedback that they're getting. So local actions and an assignment largely to managers supported by HRBPs. And a third program, which is Moments That Matter, we call it, whereby different key moments in the life cycle, whether it's onboarding, whether it's when you are changing a role, whether it is when you get promoted or when you're exiting the organization, we are developing those programs which would ensure that we are listening to our employees at those moments and providing that feedback to COEs and HR leadership for them to improve those experiences, because that's the assignment to them, to develop policies and interventions so that employees' experiences at those critical moments are well taken care of. So those are the portfolio of programs, apart from different ad hoc requirements that every organization has. Like we are right now doing a COVID pulse to ensure that we are providing support to our employees. But these are our standard programs which would happen annually. And why the moment of matter is in slight different color or shaded, because this is a program which is running without any intervention and it is running continuously. So here we automate the process and then make sure there is no effort required in administration of that. Now, once we developed or made progress or understood what is the different kind of programs, then came the question about framework and item. And here I would say that we used external research extensively, and I'll mention 5 models that we kind of used here in our program. One, Mechlin's needs theory, job characteristic model, job demands resource model for burnout, organization justice, and team dynamics. Those are the 5 models we used. We also used all the data that we had over the last 2-3 years from our employees as they had responded to earlier items in our surveys. We connected that data with all our internal data like performance, organizational delivery of volume, profitability. At the end, we had somewhere around 26 million data points. We obviously used SCM modeling through SPSS, wrote code lines of around 20,000 code lines to understand what are the items that can fit into our model and can also predict employee performance and attrition. And based on that, we developed a model and thereafter started clubbing elements and factors which can pull together through factor analysis to come up with a framework. So this is our framework where we said organizational health is defined as a sum of engagement of employees and commitment of employees toward PepsiCo. That's what we call org health. And it is in turn driven by factors like what I have perception about company, my work, my career, or my team. That's the core of org health. We have allied measures like my belief in the company, which is coming from employee confidence index that I spoke to you about. And my manager is coming from another program that we have, which is around giving upward feedback to managers, which we called people. So these are the drivers. All the 6 are drivers which drive engagement and commitment of an employee, which in turn is equivalent to org health, which in turn then drives employee performance, retention, and business results. And all this is standing on top of our cultural framework, which we call the PepsiCo way. So this entire model came together. We, in fact, improved our model fit with the work by around 6-7 percentage points based on the work we did. And we used that in 2019. So I've now spoken to you about what we did to make sure we are refining the framework and the portfolio of surveys. I'll now take you to a journey where how did we enable and empower managers to drive this engagement? And therefore, I'll focus on our core program, which is org health. Here, the first thing about assignment, and as you would speak to anyone, they would say that the first thing that while you're designing a survey or a program, you have to think about who has the most important assignment. And in that, action pyramid comes to mind. So typical top-down practice that we always used to have in PepsiCo was senior leaders would look at the results, they would define the priorities, global actions, and thereafter they would be cascaded through layers to different layers in the organization. It would be cascaded to OD teams across different sectors and different geographies. Then it will come to HRBPs and they'll then cascade it to managers. By the time it reached the managers, because every layer adds on 1 or 2 priorities of their own, by the time it would reach to the manager would have no say in it, and they would be burdened by so many actions which sometimes are speaking to their local need and sometimes are not. And therefore, there was a stress in the system, or there was a need to relook at that model, at least in PepsiCo. And therefore, we looked at bottoms-up practice where we said the manager has the most important assignment. they would decide what is it that they need to work on based on the data and analytical support that we provide them, because every manager cannot have the same capability to decipher what should they be working on. So we'll provide that. And thereafter, each layer on top of it would just have the role of supporting the managers on the actions that the manager has chosen. Obviously, there is a sidebar which you can see. One recommended priority can come from a geography to the manager, which is to ensure that everything is connected together. Managers don't go and work on so many varied things that we don't have, large impact is not getting created in the organization. So that is the first thing that we decided, that we need to move from top-down practice to a bottoms-up practice at PepsiCo to really empower the managers. Now, empowerment just does not mean that we put everything on them. It also means to build capability and appropriate resources and support. And therefore, what did we do there? Three basic things. Experience, we ensure that they have the data on their mobile phones. We also ensure a one-click download of report if they want in a PPT, which they can take and discuss with their colleagues or their teams and things like that. We provided them support on actions by two things. One, we gave them recommended priorities of, okay, this is your result, but this is what you should be working on, and we'll talk about it in a bit. And we also provided them, okay, if you have to work on these priorities, what are the actions you should be taking? So we provided them that. And third, and the last, and the most important or most exciting piece that we did was around nudges. We provided, or we ensured that we were sending them behavioral nudge to ensure that they finally take that action. From the action bucket above, we were helping them define those actions, but by nudges, we were kind of making sure that they were acting on their own commitments or their own, action plans. So step by step, recommended actions. This is an algorithm which we created with our knowledge partners, OV. Thanks, Scott and Jerry, on that. What this algorithm does is it replicates the OD consulting process. If I, as an OD expert, have to go and sit with my CEO with the reports that he or she has, and I have to talk to them that, hey, looking at your report, these are the things that you should be working on. That's what this algorithm tries to replicate, and very successfully so. So it takes into account key driver analysis to ensure that return on actions are taken care of. It weighs in organizational priorities, the sidebar that I spoke about, one recommended priority from a geography, it weighs that in. It also considers the results of your peers and your manager to ensure that it is thinking about the context that you are in. It's not that, hey, without the context, you can take any action. So therefore, it weighs those actions or those results of your peers and managers in. And based on that, it creates a set of recommendations for the manager. And obviously, we did a couple of iterations on it, experiments by iteration to get it right. And that algorithm is working pretty well for us. Thereafter, actions. Once the priorities are clear, we also needed to tell the managers, hey, this is the kind of things that you should be doing or you can be doing. And there again, we created a library of actions, which is catered to local action taking. So any manager, if they take anything of our library, they can act upon it themselves rather than taking any support from anyone else. So what is it that the manager can do about it was the key. And it was validated both internally, externally, in making sure the language is right. We did that along with all our sector partners, all our geography OD leaders, and externally we obviously checked best practices and made sure it would create an impact. So that's the library that we created for our managers. So, like I said, we created experience, we created action, through the priority algorithm and the library. And thereafter, the third thing that I would talk about is nudges. But before I talk about what we did, just a refresher or a reminder to everyone on the call. I'm sure most of you know this. What is a nudge? And this comes from all the books that all of you would have read, Nudge, or the book that Org Vitality has, Learning to Nudge. And there are tons and tons of material if you just Google on nudge. To me, nudge is a targeted intervention that reduces the cognitive load of the recipient and therefore helps drive the action. Nudges are most useful when someone is confused or someone is inexperienced, or they are on that, how should I say, when they are on that cliff where they don't know whether they should take a step forward or backward. That's where the nudge acts the most or provides the most impact. Now, if you go into any literature on nudges, you would see that there are hundreds and hundreds kinds of nudges. Obviously, nudge is not like, even a reminder mail can sometimes be called nudge, but that's not what we are talking here. But what are different kind of nudges? So we said, okay, we cannot experiment with hundreds of kind of nudge, but we would consider 4 nudges or 4 kind of nudges that we would experiment with. And these were, 1, social norms. We all know it as peer pressure. My friend in my college went for a vacation, so I should also be going for a vacation. So social pressure, managers or best managers do this. What kind of manager are you? That's a kind of a social nudge. A change default, which simplifies and reduces your mental load. So should we do opt-in or should we do opt-out? Or, in Microsoft Word, you have these, standard or custom installation or recommended installation. And for whatever number of years I've been using Microsoft, I've always gone with standard because custom installation asks you too many questions. So it's very difficult for me to understand. So how do we reduce that load? Context where you provide an understanding to the employee or a manager, hey, if you do this, there is a potential increase or decrease in your scores by this number. So how do you provide that implication? And reinforcement nudge, which is my favorite, which is really about helping them make a commitment and then stand by that commitment. So in the picture, you see, the refrigerator being locked because you made a commitment that I'll not eat ice cream after 10 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the night or in the evening. And therefore, you lock that and lose the key so that you cannot, defy your own commitment. So those are the 4 kind of commitments we said, or nudges we said we'll use in our nudging system. And what did we design? We designed a simple nudge mechanism whereby we said it will be in 3 phases. These dates on the top are from our program. So our, results were released on 28th of October last year. And as you can see, we are still in drive action phase. We've therefore still not completed the entire cycle once, but we said in the phase 1, it will be about internalizing and sharing those reports. So the manager should download the report, internalize it, and share it with his or her team members. And they were receiving 3 to 6 nudges based on what action they took and when did they take that action. Did they download on the first nudge? Then obviously they should not be receiving more nudges. But if they did not, then how should we kind of elevate the level of nudges? Second phase, where we ask them, okay, you have downloaded, shared with your team. Now is the time to finalize your action. This is also the time for us to set objectives early in the year. So combining with that and newer resolution and things like that. So we used all that mechanism to say, hey, can you finalize? And again, they received 2 to 5 nudges. And the last one being drive action, which is right now in a limbo a little bit because of COVID situation, but we wanted to drive action on the real action plans that each one of them have made. So how do we drive that? Just to complete the story, these are the kind of nudges, pictorial nudges, not much language, which makes it pleasing on eye, which makes this pleasing on their mobile device, and therefore providing them quick steps of how do they do it. Again, you can see in both these nudges, there is a mix of different techniques for 4 kind of nudges that we spoke about. And this is my last slide. I want to give it quickly back to Jain, but some early results. Like I said, we have really not completed the entire cycle. So maybe later this year or early next year, we'll have much better story and probably a publication ready for that. But what we have seen, typically, when you launch this for managers for the first time, we were doing reports for managers for the first time. You typically see 35-40% response rate, or you see 35-40% engagement. At PepsiCo, it was almost 2x of it. Recommended priorities, we anecdotally know that all managers across, whether senior or junior or different layers, they liked it, and then they leveraged it. And that can be said very well, because HRBPs gave us feedback that they very well went into a support role rather than spending their time on analyzing a lot of stuff. They went into a support role of coaching managers of how to take actions based on the recommended priorities and the action library. And they loved it. And they, in fact, sent us a video thank you to some of us to say how did they love it. User experience with this entire framework of ease of reporting, the nudges helping people to go at the right place, is now become a model for all other programs. So apart from engagement surveys, now we are looking at 360 and other programs to kind of follow this. We also have a very, very unique ask that we never thought would happen so quickly. We thought it will take us a couple of years to get there. But based on the success of last year, our geographies are coming back to us to say, hey, why can't you engage frontline managers with it? This year or last year, we had only reports and everything available in English, and therefore we were engaging managers of professional employees, which was like around 5,000 managers. But our ask is to have it in languages, and therefore this year we would be having this entire program in 13 more languages, so 14 languages including English, to ensure that we reach out to almost like 15,000 managers in the organization. And last but not the least, to really measure it appropriately, all of us are data people. We have added one item to our survey, which would define or which would tell us the perception of employees at a local level, whether their managers or whether their work groups took any action or not. That would be a real icing on the cake if we get positive data on that as we look at trends and other things in 2020 program. So that was our story at PepsiCo. I know questions we'll take at the end, so I'll hand it over to Jain. Jain, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Sachin. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jain Acosta, and I'm going to be sharing with you today my experience. Some of my experience is that I have had leading the employee survey program at Allstate. So you just heard from Sachin about Pepsi's efforts to roll out manager survey feedback reporting at manager levels. Allstate, in contrast, has had a long history, 30 years of doing employee surveys and rolling out results down deep into the organization, down to the manager level with very detailed reporting. So we've been doing this a very long time. And what we learned is that manager reporting, if not designed very thoughtfully and designed with purpose, can have some unintended consequences that can undermine the impact of your survey program or make it less impactful than what you might desire. At least that's what happened with us. And so in 2017, we did a redesign of our survey program, focusing on segmenting by audience. And I'm going to share with you about that redesign and about some more details about some of those issues that we experienced. And my hope is that others on the call who are embarking on survey program design efforts can learn from our experiences and take some of what we learned and make some more thoughtful decisions in your survey program design. But before I jump into all that, just a few quick things about Allstate. We are the nation's largest publicly held personal lines insurer. We protect 16 million households from life uncertainties. We not only offer auto, home, and life insurance, which many of you probably already knew, but what you may not know is that we also provide protection for your consumer electronics and for your identity through our acquisitions of SquareTrade and InfoArmor. We also own Answer Financial, which is an insurance comparison technology tool. Allstate has 46,500 employees, and they're located primarily in the US, but also in Canada, India, and Northern Ireland. In addition, our sales agents are contractors. They're not full-time employees. There are about 13,000 of those exclusive agents or exclusive financial specialists that we have located all over the US as well as in Canada. The reason I make that distinction is to point out that the survey program I'm going to be telling you about today is specific to our employee population, the 46,500, that is a little bit more international. The agents have their own survey that is different from this one. Okay, so prior to this 2017 redesign, we had a survey that I would consider very typical of what many organizations have for an employee engagement survey. It was done annually, it was a census survey, and it was very long, 75 items, and it measured engagement as well as a list of drivers that I call the kitchen sink of drivers. So there were items about how you feel about your company, its strategy, pay and benefits, company culture. There were items about your department environment. There were items about what was going on in your team. Was it inclusive? Was there empowerment within the team? And then there were items about your manager and the specific manager effectiveness behaviors exhibited by that individual. So was your manager giving you performance feedback that was useful in helping you get better? Was your manager being clear about what your performance goals were and what was expected of you? Was your manager supporting your work-life integration, et cetera? Although there were different audiences or targets that were tasked within these different questions, we had the same reporting protocol for every leader in the company, regardless of whether they were a senior leader or a frontline leader, and that was they received a roll-up, an aggregate report of the summarizing their results on the survey on every single item, all 75 items on the survey, as long as they had 6 or more people under them respond to the survey. Similarly, our action planning approach and tools was also universal for all levels of leaders. So all levels of leaders got the same toolkit, and they were able to go into the tool or, do it on their own outside the tool, but they were able to create action plans on any item on the survey. And they really had a lot of, discretion around how to figure out which items they wanted to act on, what criteria to use, and what items they chose to take action on. We had an opportunity in 2015, 2016 to do some focus groups and interviews to learn more about about our employees' perceptions of the survey, what was working well, what wasn't. And we did this work with our field organizations. These are our claims employees and our sales support employees, and they represent about 2/3 of our overall employee population. So the majority of our employees and the ones that are really intended to be, are included and intended to be using the survey as a tool. So we did focus groups of these frontline employees, and then we did interviews, complimentary interviews with the leadership, this more senior leadership out in these field audiences. And we learned a lot. I'd say that the things we learned weren't shocking, like they were things that we suspected, but what we didn't know was just how pervasive some of these themes were and how strong some of these themes were. So the first thing that we learned was that employees really were not bought into the survey. They felt like they take this survey every year, they give their input, and nothing ever changes. And they also felt like the survey is too long. Those were our two strongest universal themes. They also, we also heard stories, and I wouldn't say this was universal, thank goodness, but a good number of people shared stories about some bad behaviors that leadership had exhibited in the past around managing survey results or pressuring employees to complete the survey so they could, achieve a certain response rate goal. I'd say that the folks who shared these stories did admit that this behavior was a lot more prominent farther back in the past, before this voice survey, even in 2009. Before voice, we had a kind of a similarly designed survey called QLMS that was around for almost 20 years, shockingly. And there was a lot of baggage with that survey, which was why they decided to rebrand in 2009. So there was a lot of leaders managing results, leaders holding town halls and coaching their employees about how they should respond to items, and various tactics to drive up response rates that may have made employees feel like they didn't actually have a choice about whether to take the survey that was more required than voluntary. And so in 2009, when they did that rebranded voice, they put some measures in place and a lot of communication in place to put a stop to some of that. So what we learned was that there's a lot less of it than there used to be, but there's still some going on. And that the other thing that I think is striking is that the people who are around to experience some of these bad behaviors, like it has stuck with them. Like they're not over it, and it's still influencing their perception of today's survey, even though so much time has passed. So relatedly, when we talked with leaders about their perceptions of survey results and how valuable they are, they cited some of those behaviors and some of that baggage as one of the reasons that they felt that the survey results made it lack credibility. They were skeptical about the credibility of our results. They were also largely skeptical about the credibility of the employee survey results because the results are just so favorable, and they have a really good point. Our results are just very, very favorable. We blow the benchmarks away every year. And when you look at other external indices of employee experience, Allstate isn't showing up as strong on those as we do on our own internal employee engagement survey. And so leaders are looking at all this and saying, the survey data is bogus. It's not really reflecting reality, and they're being, it's undermining their use of it. Another problem with the highly favorable results is that they fail to convey a call for action. When you get a report back and all of your results are between 85% favorable and 95% favorable, and you're a leader and you're trying to decide how to invest your time to really improve employee experience or to improve culture, and you're looking at these results and you're thinking, well, I mean, almost everyone is happy. There's just a few people that aren't satisfied with this thing. Is it really worth spending a lot of time or investment acting on this, right? And so that action piece that we were really hoping to see as an outcome of our survey being undermined by how favorable the results are. And then finally, Sachin, I feel like I'm gonna just repeat you here. We heard from leaders that another problem with our survey being used for action is that when you go through the action planning process, it's a lengthy process. So you get the results, it takes a while to digest it all because back then the reports were very long and there was just a lot to get through. And then, so you go through that and you figure out what you want to prioritize, and then you have to socialize that, right? And you have to take it around to your team and to different leaders and get buy-in, and then you need to stand up a committee who's going to be in charge of working on these action items, and they need to figure out what they're going to do, and this is a very lengthy process. By the time you get through that whole process, the organization has probably changed twice. You probably have new leaders, people have left, other people have moved in, maybe there's been a tiny restructure, and then at that point people are starting to doubt whether the results that you are using to drive action even make sense anymore, or if they're appropriate anymore to use. And so this annual cadence was contributing to some of the issues too. When we talked to employees in the focus group, we really dug deep on this issue around honest responding or inflated results, and we asked them what was going on and why these results came back so positively when there's other data that would suggest that maybe that's not really how employees feel. And they were, we heard a variety of responses. Many people said, I'm very honest on the survey, but we did get a good number of people that admitted that they definitely inflate their responses on the survey. And when asked why, they said that it's because of the way we do manager reporting. So this is the tie into the manager reporting focus here. Because we drive results down and we include every item on the whole survey in manager reports, they're worried about the potential for negative consequences for their managers if they respond negatively to any item on the survey, even if it feels like that item's not under the manager's control. And they like their managers, they want their managers to get in trouble, and they don't want to deal with that. So it's just easier for them to just go 5, 5, 5, 5, or strongly agree, strongly agree, all down the survey, than to risk something negative happening to their managers. So when we entered our redesign, we really wanted to address some of these concerns and issues that we heard about during our focus group. And so we really wanted to improve survey taker interest, and we knew in order to do that, we needed to have shorter surveys, and we needed to make sure those surveys were clear with regards to what their purpose was. We really wanted to address this issue around inflation in our results and promote honest responding, and we knew that in order to do that, we needed to make sure that we were giving the feedback to the right audience who could actually act on that feedback and make changes. And we needed to make sure that we put processes in place or measures in place to make sure that the feedback to those direct managers from their direct reports was only used for developmental purposes, and there would never be a perception that it could be used punitively or for decision making around, career opportunities or termination or anything like that. And finally, we really wanted to see more action and change come from our survey results, and we knew, or we learned from our focus groups, that in order to achieve that, we needed to provide feedback more frequently, and we also needed to make it more easy to figure out what to act on. So we also introduced, as part of this, some additional tools for managers, most notably an algorithm-based recommendation for which items to act on that works a lot like the one that Sachin presented on. So a very similar thing we introduced when we did this redesign. And then ultimately what we did was we segmented our survey. So we took that one long kitchen sink survey called Voice, and we turned it into one manager-focused survey. So Inspire Leadership is a manager effectiveness upward feedback survey that is focused on measuring manager behaviors associated with effectiveness. And then the other survey is called Inspire Culture, and it is focused on department level aspects of the employee experience, or holistic aspects of the employee experience that as they vary by department, with senior leadership as its target audience. So we've covered a good bit of what's on this slide, but just some highlights here to point out. We were very thoughtful and careful about making sure the content was appropriate for the audience, as I talked about just now. But I also just want to point out that with this redesign, we were really able to shorten the length of the survey, which is kind of a bonus that came along with the segmentation strategy. So we went from that 75 item survey to a manager survey that is 19 items and a department oriented employee experience survey that is 26 items. Another key point here is that we needed to be thoughtful and think differently about the two surveys when it came to designing all of the decision rules that you make when you're figuring out how to do reporting, right? So first you need to figure out, well, what's the criteria to get a report? And so we have different minimum N size criteria. Our manager survey, the minimum N size, we lowered it down to you just need 3 responses to get a report. And the reason is that we really wanted to push feedback out to as many managers as possible, because without getting that feedback, managers have, you're not going to have any action or change taken from the results if you're not sharing the feedback. And so it was important to us to have more managers than ever before get feedback from the survey. On the other hand, for the Inspire Culture survey, which was a survey that we targeted senior leaders for as the audience who would get results and get reporting and be accountable for those results, we raised the minimum N size up to 15 responses. And you also have to be a senior leader to get a report. You have to be a senior leader and get at least 15 responses to the survey. We also communicated a perspective on how results should be used. We said for the manager survey, these results should be purely developmental. They should be used in individual development plans, personal development plans, and they should not be used in individual performance management. For the culture survey, we said that these results should be used in talent strategy decisions at those higher levels. They should inform, changes or design decisions around employee experience programs or processes, and that we were okay in this case with these results showing up in like a department scorecard that might come out annually or quarterly. When you're designing a survey, as you all know, you also make decisions about who else can access the results, or access the reports. So when you have these reports out there, can anyone see anyone else's reports, or do you put some constraints around that? And oftentimes, the permissions are set up so that leaders can see reports of anyone in their downline as well as themselves. We wanted to do something a little bit different for the manager effectiveness survey. We wanted the feedback to really just be only for that manager, shared only with that manager, and that manager could be, would be encouraged to share insights with their manager to help with their development, but we didn't want to put that automatic access in place. And we wanted to be thoughtful about roll-ups. So we understood the value of a department level roll-up of manager effectiveness strengths opportunities per se. So we wanted to do that, but we wanted to get away from the roll-up, kind of those mid-level roll-ups, right? Like maybe you have a team of 6 and another team of 3 and they roll up to somebody and now you have a team of 9, like that kind of a mid-level roll-up. We wanted to get away from that because we didn't see the value given the content of the survey. And we thought, it would just introduce another aspect of like, maybe someone's going to do something bad with these results, or, maybe someone's going to figure out how this manager was rated, so we wanted to get away from that. So all that is to say that we did not actually achieve those desires. Those were original recommendations, but when we took this to senior leadership, they felt so strongly that it was important for them to be able to have access to their direct reports, Inspire employee survey results or manager effectiveness survey results, so that they could really support them in their development plans and their development journey. And so we kind of pivoted away from that. And then finally, we have different cadences for the 2 different surveys. And so for our manager survey, we run that twice a year because we think that there shouldn't be a long action planning process involved. It should be pretty quick to start acting on those results, and we want to be able to give people, feedback to measure the progress against. And our culture survey is just once a year because it's dealing with larger issues that involve more people to change and take longer to change. I'm going to jump ahead for the sake of time here. These are just some examples of the items. But what did we find? Let's jump to that. So what did we improve? I missed one thing on the content that's important here. It's important to know that we included the same exact engagement index in both the manager survey and the culture survey. Because, for various reasons, so we could have unified analyses, be able to pulse engagement more frequently over time, et cetera. So did we improve honest responding or reduce inflation when we did all this? So we decided that really it was only reasonable to expect, given kind of how things panned out, that we would have reduced inflated responses on the culture survey because we took away the manager reporting there. It only goes high-level leaders, very high minimum end size. On the other survey, on the manager survey, although we did make sure the items were under their control, we didn't effectively remove some of the higher level leaders having access and some of those concerning issues. So given that where we ended up, we expected that if we were to have reduced inflation, gotten more honest responding, we would see that engagement index that we measure consistently across all the surveys would have lower favorability on the culture than on the voice survey of the past or the leadership survey, the manager survey. And in fact, that seems to be what we found. It's hard to make confident conclusions because you can't control for time. Time is a considerable confound here. But what we're seeing, and you can see here in this graph at the bottom, the black bar is your baseline, The turquoise bars are the department level survey, and the orange bars here is your manager effectiveness survey. And again, this is just the same exact engagement index measured on these different surveys at different points in time. And so what you can see there is that the difference, so first of all, you see that there's a drop in favorability at least the first time that we administered the culture survey from that old baseline voice survey. But maybe what's more interesting is that there's an average gap of about 3 points between engagement as measured on the manager effectiveness survey versus the culture survey. And then in terms of like how much do these typically change over time when you're looking at one single survey, it's only about 1 point fluctuation on average. So it seems like the survey effect might be larger than the time effect, which is just kind of remarkable, right? You'd expect that engagement would be more responsive to things happening over time than the context of the survey, but that's not what we're finding here. And then did we increase result-driven action? We really only have preliminary data. In 2019, we added one item to the manager survey that asked about, how much leadership was, or the manager was taking action based on last year's results. And so we have administered the survey twice with that item on it, and we found a huge, what I think is a huge increase, like with these N sizes of 32,000, a 6-point increase is very large, which is what we found here. It was 67% favorable in April and then 73% favorable in October. So we were just really happy to see that, but just also want to acknowledge it's very preliminary, and we are, holding out on celebrating until we see how this continues to trend in additional surveys over time. So I think we're kind of short on time. I think my biggest takeaway here is that decisions about how you set up reporting and how you set up report access matter more than we might think. So I think, oftentimes we're going through the survey process, we think about these as just being administrative aspects of the survey process, and we want to maybe streamline them and keep it consistent for everyone. But what we have found here at Allstate is that the way that you design reporting and who gets the reports and who has access and who doesn't actually influences the way people respond. And that's really kind of a big deal when you think about all the ways that we're using this data. Originally we wanted to include this engagement index on all of the surveys so that we could go to our CEO with a trend or a pulse on engagement over time, but we can't do that because look, it goes up and down depending on which survey. And if you didn't have that context in mind, you might think that there were events taking place at Allstate that were causing these, I think, pretty big fluctuations, again, given the large N size, and that may be the case. We don't know because we can't control for time, but it seems likely that it's really that survey context that's driving that. And then when you think about all the different ways that we're using surveys and predictive models and combining it with different kinds of data, there's just a lot that could be affected by the survey results being different because of the way that you administer a report. So I'm going to stop there because we only have like 6 minutes left. So I want to kick it back to Scott.
Great. Well, thanks, Jen. I think that was really interesting, and is an interesting kind of counterpoint and comparison to Sachin's. So everybody, here's what we're going to do. Right now, I've got a couple of questions to ask the presenters, and I know that there's been some questions coming in via the chat box. And we'll sort of work through about another 6 minutes or so till quarter after. But then, probably many of us have been missing our professional conferences this spring and are wondering, gosh, what will take its place? And so kind of impromptu, though some people might have had a heads up, what we're going to do is starting at a quarter after, people that want to leave can leave. But I think Jen, Sachin, and I will go on video. It will become our virtual conference happy hour. We'll see who sticks around, wants to ask questions. It'll be sort of like after a presentation in a big conference, people come up to the podium and ask questions of the presenters, and then maybe we move it to the bar. So we'll see how that works. So just sort of brace for that. But, I want to set up a question or two. So Sachin and Jen, you each had a different story with about your survey evolutions, and each of your organizations had a really long history. but it was some relatively recent, major transformations about how you're going about things. And even though your stories were different, I think there were some striking similarities. And just sort of walking through this list of 3 things on the screen, you sharpened objectives, whether it was tracking employee beliefs, providing manager feedback, doing more team-based action planning and so forth, but you sharpened that, and that helped define who was supposed to do what, right? Whether it was reporting that just went to lower level managers for individual development, or higher level executives for other kinds of things. And then your machinery decisions, and there were quite a few machinery decisions, were flowing from all of that. And I think notably, you each split apart what used to be more of a kitchen sink survey into pieces. So maybe one of my first questions is, was that worth it? And I think I know the answers, but Jen, we'll start with you and then move to Sachin. Is managing 2 or more different programs worth the sharpening of the objectives and the machinery that it allows? So Jen, you want to go first?
Sure. Yes, I definitely think so, because even if you argue that we didn't fully achieve some of the things that we intended to, we shortened those surveys dramatically by being able to separate by focus and target and audience, and the reduced length has gone over just really well. And when it comes to buy-in for the surveys and acceptance of the surveys, so that in and of itself is just a huge benefit, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Sachin, do you have a sense?
Yeah, no.
To split it apart?
It's definitely worth it. Look, when it was one Frankenstein survey, as we used to call it, people were not clear and different audiences were confused. So the key to success in such things, in my head, is always simplify, and making them apart and defining those 3 things that you just mentioned, Scott, helped or enabled us to have different surveys for different audience, with clear set of deliverables for each one of them. And I think it goes a long way in driving ownership, in driving conversation, and in driving simplicity, because human mind can take so much of complexity. With the world getting complex outside, we need to simplify things internally, is how I look at it. And it was definitely the way to go, and it was all worth it.
Cool. Let me go to some questions from the audience. Sachin, this one's for you. Did you receive any pushback from managers as a result of the pre-selected priorities?
Not really. Interestingly, more than managers, we got pushback from our HR teams. And the pushback was more about AI is a black box sometimes, and then they don't understand what happens inside it. So how do you convince that AI is really AI and it's doing the right thing? So it took us some time, change management conversations, to show them what the AI is giving, and blind it, or have conversations saying, hey, if you just remove this, what would be your priorities based on this report? And building that confidence. So we did get some pushback from HR leaders and HR teams. I have not seen any pushback from managers. They were all happy that someone is doing the work for them, and it's coming to them in a simple enough way for them to start taking actions immediately.
Mm-hmm. And your managers, if they don't like the priorities that were suggested, they don't have to use them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They are not bound by the priorities we are asking them to take, but it is definitely making it simple for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jen, here's one for you. Do you think that reporting end size influenced the differences between the manager survey and the culture survey?
Yes. So I think end size is one contributing factor, because obviously lower end sizes come with, reduced sense of confidentiality And then I think also just that continued concern of, like, about what, is, I want to make sure that I like my manager. I want to make sure good things happen to my manager, and my manager doesn't get in trouble, or even, doesn't get upset over the results. I think that's the other thing that influenced the manager results looking different than the culture results, where the the target of the culture results are a little bit more ambiguous, right? So it's like the department in general, and kind of these higher level leaders you might not be as close with are the targets.
The faceless machine.
Yeah.
One similarity between what you both did was there were some extensive focus groups and stakeholder feedback that was playing in your redesigns. If you had to give any advice, and this is a question for each of you, and this time I'll start, Sachin, with you and then go to Jain. If you had to give advice to people, was there anything you learned from the way you gathered feedback that was most effective, or the way you used it? Sachin, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I was on mute, sorry. One thing that I've learned over this process, and I would say we have to keep in mind, is all the stakeholders that we deal with, they are not experts on survey, they are not experts on data analytics. And the more we can simplify our ask and our program for them, is the better feedback and the better results you will get, because they don't need to know all the things that you do in the kitchen, but the final product in front of them, or the dish that you are making for them, has to be appealing to them. So how do you three tips: simplify, simplify, simplify.
I agree.
Can you simplify those steps into one, or does it not work that way? Jen, you were saying you agree. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just, along the same lines as what Sasha was saying, I'm just thinking back to those focus groups and those interviews. They were quite some time ago, and I'm trying to think, what went particularly well and what didn't. And so I just, one thing that jumps out at me is there were some questions on, within our interview protocol that people were able to share, were really able to share their thoughts on very easily. And those were when we asked questions related to what were their experiences like as either a survey taker or recipient of the survey. But when we tried to ask them for their opinions or input on what I think we should be the experts on, so for instance, an item, the design of an item, or a graph, the way a graph looks, or things like that, they could not answer those questions. And so my takeaway is don't be thoughtful about what your audience is going to be able to have valuable opinions on, and don't expect that people are going to be able to give good feedback or input on, in Sachin's case, check with data analytics, but in my case, some of these more technical aspects of design.
So